Evening, everyone, and welcome to the Global Salvation Prophecy Station. I am here this evening with JC, and we are going to continue with our Bible study on Revelation. Welcome, JC.
Glad to be here. It's been a couple months. We were supposed to do this about 5 times since the last one, but wasn't able to. It was a pretty swamped July for me. So
Summer is always busy.
yeah, the summertime gets kind of swamped. So but now that there's no trips to plan for and there's no surprises that I can see on the horizon, we should be able to do this at least once per for week, maybe, for hopefully the next few months as we dissect the most, I shouldn't say the most important book of the Bible, but certainly one of the most important texts ever written.
Yes.
The book of Revelation. So anyway, what I wanted to start with was something that I will say a few times during this entire thing because it's very important. So I wanted to tackle this idea that the book was written by someone called John the Elder and not John the Apostle. The reason why people, or I should say people, scholars tend to think this is because of the style in the Greek text that it was constructed in. The English translations kind of clean it up to make it read like an actual book. But if you have the earliest Greek text, Revelation does not read like a normal book. That it doesn't read like one at all. And it reads completely different than everything else John ever wrote. So a lot of people think, well, it couldn't possibly be him because it's not his writing style. So they created this new guy called John the Elder. He must have wrote Revelation, and that's why it reads very different from everything else John wrote, whether it be 1 John, 2 John, 3 John, John's Gospel. But there's a reason why it reads very different. Revelation was, as far as I can remember, the only writing in the whole Bible that nobody sat down, grabbed something to write with, grabbed something to write on, and just began writing what the Holy Spirit inspired them to say. Revelation was written as kind of like a play-by-play of what he was seeing as he was being shown it. It's written as notes, not as a book. And the Greek reads like notes, like if anybody is trying to jot down the things that I'm saying right now, that's how Revelation was actually written. It was written from what John was seeing and hearing in the moment he saw and heard it. So it reads just like lines, line after line, not in terms of one common thread of like a story.
Yeah.
And that's why people think it wasn't him who actually wrote it, because it's a different writing style than he did compared to his previous works. But he wrote this in a very different way. He was not sitting down going, okay, what should I say now? He's like, wow, I have to write that down now? I have to write this down now? And I think one of the most amazing things about it is that if we remember, he was very close to for Jesus. He was the closest apostle probably to him. And when he turned around and saw Jesus, or like he revealed himself to John, John didn't recognize him. He fell over as if he was dead because the things that he was seeing so shocked him. So that's why the book of Revelation reads very different in the Greek. It reads like you see notes on a notepad. Doesn't read like a story. The English translations have cleaned it up and made it flow like a book. But in reality, it did not flow like that. It was very choppy. So that's the first thing that I wanted to tackle. Next, I guess I just want to do, since it's kind of like starting over, but not starting over, maybe just say like a few things about the author, right? So first, we know he was imprisoned on the island of Patmos.
Mhm.
And from some of the research that I have heard and I have seen about this, Patmos was a terrible place in John's day. Terrible, terrible place. John was the only apostle to see old age. And Jesus sort of hinted at this, that perhaps this would happen, because he even said that if I willed it, John would live until I came back.
Mm.
Imagine if John was still alive today. But he also told John to look after his mom, so he wasn't going to perish at an early age. Also, the island itself was actually where political prisoners were kept. But what crime did John commit against Rome? Well, John tells us. John said the following about why he was imprisoned. I was imprisoned for the word of God and the testimony of Jesus. Because the testimony of Jesus means you are telling Caesar that there's a king above Caesar.
Yes.
And that would make you a very dangerous criminal to anyone who thought himself as God.
Mhm.
Because if that started getting out, suddenly your divinity would definitely be in question, because people would start seeing someone else the way they're supposed to see you. John also had the right to write what became the book of Revelation, because this book, more so than prophecy probably, or at least equal to prophecy, is about persecution. And John was enduring persecution. So he was qualified to write about what was to come and the things he saw, because of the suffering one day the church would face. The kind of suffering that he was seeing, and the kind of suffering we ourselves have been seeing around the world and beginning to creep into the Western world incrementally. So, but soon all Christians everywhere will face the kind of suffering that John was, and the kind of suffering that our fellow brothers and sisters around the world currently have to endure. And it's a very scary proposition until you get to the end of Revelation.
Yeah.
And I'm going to say this again throughout this whole thing, but Revelation basically tells us no matter what you go through, it's worth it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That's why Christians around this world, like the Eastern world Christians have a very different view of the book of Revelation than most Western world Christians see this book as either insight to the future or like they fear it.
Yeah.
Nation or fear. The Eastern world Christians see it the way it's supposed to be seen, a book of hope to prepare them for what they're now going through, and that in the end, it's going to be worth it.
Sure.
So anyway, that's how I wanted to start off this one. And then I just want to quickly recap. When we ended the last one, I explained the phrase the Lord's Day and what it actually meant, how it had nothing to do with Jesus, how it had everything to do with Caesar, and how we have records of how Christians who wouldn't say Caesar is Lord on this day that they were supposed to do it were actually horribly killed. So that actually is leading into where I guess you could say the official, unofficial beginning of part 2 now starts off. Yeah. And that would be this: martyred, endure, and overcome. So the original meaning for the word martyr meant witness. I believe that's what the original meaning was. But of course, time has changed the meaning to this word. People who gave a testimony as a witness to the faith began to be killed for doing so. So the meaning changed from someone who was speaking the testimony of Christ to someone who died for their faith, for speaking the testimony of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
So Now it wasn't just speaking it; it was dying.
Yeah.
Indoor, right? This is one of the things that the body of Christ is called to do: to see things through, to make it to the end, to end your race through the troubles that come your way, right? Remain faithful no matter the cost of consequences. Jesus also called us to do something else. He called us to overcome, right? This is actually the key word in all of Revelation. We are called not just to endure the persecution, but we are called to come out of it on top. We are expected to be standing tall at the end of it. Jesus said to the Laodicean church, to him who overcomes, I will grant to sit with me on my throne, as I also overcame and sat down with my Father on his throne, right? So overcoming for the churches is a constant theme throughout the book of Revelation. Endure and overcome. God does not tell us the future so we can run around and say, hey, look, I know what's going to happen. He tells us that way those living during that time can prepare for what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And the only way you can really prepare is to get yourself mentally ready to endure it so you can overcome. We are expected to do what Jesus did. So he tells us to do what he did. Endure and overcome. Being called to follow Christ does not mean we say things like we can't be righteous, right? Because, Jesus was righteous, so we can't be. It does not mean we cannot be holy. It does not mean we can't endure and overcome like he did. People who say those things are not following Christ. If he says, follow me, if he says greater things than these will you do, then obviously we can do the things that he did.
Yeah.
But a lot of Christians are taught things that the Bible doesn't say.
Yes.
And this is one of them. In fact, if you are following Christ, you are walking the narrow road to heaven. If you're not following Christ, you're not. And if you're following Christ, you are going to endure the things that he had to endure eventually. Christ's way of suffering is the way to eternal paradise with him. The Bible says in Hebrews, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame as he sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. A lot of people think that Jesus just happily went to the cross. He didn't.
So we can tell that by the night he spent in the garden, right?
Exactly. He said, is it possible for this cup to pass from me?
That's right.
The human side of him had no interest in going to the cross.
Yeah.
He knew what it was going to feel like. He knew what it was going to do, but he wasn't just human now, was he? So he had to go to the cross. And what did he say? He said, not my will. For all of you who don't think that we have a will, Jesus said, not my will, but thy will. In the Garden of Gethsemane, right? I think that's how you say the name. I'm terrible with these names, but think about this, right? It was in the Garden of Eden that mankind said, my will, not thy will. And it was in another garden where God as man said, not my will, but thy will. Reversed it.
Yeah.
Reversed everything. So
Funny, you saw that in the Bible, hey?
What'd you say?
You see a lot of things like that, the pattern in the Bible.
It is fascinating to me how when you really break down the scriptures, you see a lot of things like that. You see a lot of similarities from certain things in the New Testament to the Old Testament that you're like, wow. Like here, ready? One of the ones I like to speak about from time to time is the 6-to-1 ratio. A lot of people are like, what are you talking about? I said, well, here it is, right? Luke's gospel tells us Jesus was about 30 years old when he started his ministry.
Mhm.
right? Because under the Jewish law, you had to be 30 years old when you could become a high priest. But Luke's gospel also tells us one of the few things about his childhood when he was 12 years old. And then the next thing we read about is he's 30 years old starting his ministry. So that's about an 18-year period. He had a 3-year ministry. So that would mean for every 6 years would be 1 year of ministry, right? So 12 to 18, 1 year of ministry, 18 to 24, second year of ministry, 24 to age, to age 30, third year of ministry, right? To 6-to-1 ratio. Where else do we see a 6-to-1 ratio when it comes to God in the Bible? The book of Genesis. For 6 days, God worked, and on the
Oh,
seventh day, God rested. So we see 6-to-1 ratio
yeah.
with not only creation, but with technically the plan of salvation. A 6-to-1 ratio,
Blessing, hey? Yeah.
right? Like that kind of stuff blows my mind. But there it is. So anyway, we are to do the same thing, right? Jesus had to endure the cross. He had to endure the painful future that awaited him. So we are to endure. Look ahead to how great things are going to be if we overcome. That helps us to endure what we are going through. It helps us to overcome the troubled waters until they are calmed. You know, Paul said in Romans, and if children, then heirs, heirs of God, and joint heirs of Christ, if so be that we suffer with him, we will also be glorified together. That's a pretty comforting statement to know that if we suffer with him, which, by the way, some people ask, how can we suffer with him? He's already suffered. Well, we answer that question in Acts. When Saul was on the road to Damascus and he saw Jesus, Jesus said, "Why do you persecute me?" And Saul realized every time he hurt a Christian, he was hurting Jesus at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So when we suffer, he suffers with us. We suffer with him.
Yeah.
So that's how we can suffer with him and he with us. But in other words, if we want to receive his glory, we have to endure the suffering as well. Unfortunately, there is no smooth road to glory for the vast majority of people.
No, there's not.
So, and here's something that's going to throw people for a loop. If God writes about it, then that's what we're going to go through. Because his glory is worth anything we'd have to endure.
Mm-hmm.
If people are not enduring hardships in this world, they will most likely become part of Satan's kingdom, not God's.
Yeah.
If they are not part of God's kingdom, they'll not receive glory. The cost of following Jesus is this. Paul said it perfectly. 2 Timothy, right? All who desire to live a godly life will suffer persecution.
We will. Yeah.
The reward for suffering with Christ is worth suffering with Christ.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I will go out on a limb here and say if you never face any type of backlash or persecution for your faith, I don't really think you're part of the faith.
No.
You're not. It's one thing if it just hasn't happened yet. Like you're a brand new Christian who hasn't really gone out yet and said, "Hey, listen, I follow the Lord." But every single one of us is in for a rude awakening.
I lost friends and family, and
we all think that when we come to the Lord, like we've got like this new thing that we can bring everyone on board with. Like, hey, listen, here comes the Joe train to heaven.
Yeah.
Chugga chugga choo choo. Let's all follow Christ. And the reality is you're going to be the only caboose on the track.
Yeah.
Because no one's going to jump ahead of you and try to beat you there, and very few are going to latch on behind you. So you're like the only car on the track for a long time, and it's a harsh reality because you just don't. For those of us who come to the faith, it's hard for us to remember what we were like beforehand, how we didn't want to either.
Yeah.
It's like because now we have this new outlook. Like, hey, look where I'm heading. Follow me as as I follow Christ. Let's do it together. But most people are like, what?
You're crazy.
No.
No.
And they start calling you all kinds of weird names. And
Oh
it's,
yeah, I was told, oh, you're crazy. You have a sky daddy and all this.
oh, I love when I hear the Sky Daddy one.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what you're talking about, because the God I worship is in a throne in heaven. He's not in the sky.
Yeah.
But I did say this to an atheist once, right? Elijah was caught up to heaven on the whirlwind, right? But doesn't tell us which heaven. Now, all of us assume, and it probably is the third heaven, which is where the souls are, which is where the angels are, which is where Jesus is, which is where God is. Probably. Most likely. But let's not forget, the sky was also called heaven. Yeah. So he could be floating around a cloud at the sky right now. And so when they say Sky Daddy, you know, they might actually be talking about Elijah, and I didn't realize it. I had some fun with them a long time ago saying that. They hated me even more because now I could actually tell that there could really be someone in the sky the Bible talks about. That's not the best way to win them over, is by telling them that they're right.
Yeah.
Believe it or not. And telling them that they're wrong is more likely to win them over and tell them that they're right. Because now they have to rethink their whole lives. Because they don't want to be right, because they want it all to be, you know, hogwash. So anyway, moving on. If we endure, we will be given the right to eat from the tree of life in the paradise of God. These are some of the rewards, right? This is a tree that nobody has eaten from since the Garden of Eden. I mean, think about that. No one's eaten from that tree since then. We will not be hurt or affected by the second death. This is one of the rewards for overcoming. Another is we will be given manna and a white stone with a new name. How cool is that? Yeah. We'll be given a new name. We will be given authority over the nations to rule them with a rod of iron. Now, it's so funny because everyone says, you know, Jesus is going to rule for 1,000 years, but the Bible says we're going to rule with him. Yeah. I mean, it's not just him sitting on top of us like we're ants going, do this, do that. I mean, we're all going to get to do it. You know, there's so much that people don't seem to realize. Yeah. Whatever he gets, we get. We don't get the power to create a whole new universe, but we get a lot of the same stuff that he's going to get. We will be dressed in all white and made a pillar in the temple, never to leave. The greatest reward, I think, is this one: the right to sit with him on his throne. Yeah. What could be better? What could be better than him saying, here's your seat, and it's in his throne? My hunch would be that not many are probably going to get that one, but you never know. Maybe that throne is going to be as long as America. Yeah. Imagine. How great would that be? So, you know, these are all good incentives that could motivate you, you could say, to, you know, overcome, to endure. Because I just named a few. You know, there's a lot of rewards. There is great rewards, yeah. So those are the good. But there's also some negative ones here. You know, it's not just receiving the rewards, but there are some negative ones. There is a negative side here. You know, Jesus said, "He who overcomes," this is a great one. You know, I will not blot out their name, right? Yeah. But this means those who do not overcome, they will have their names taken out of the book of life. You know, that's pretty negative. Yeah. What that means, and I know some people are going to have a problem with this, but if your name was in the book of life, you're on your way to heaven. Yeah. If your name is taken out of that book, you've lost your chance at going to heaven. Yeah. You know, that's pretty negative.
And some people will fight you on that and say, oh, no, your name can't be taken out. And
yeah.
Well, that's not what it says.
Well, I think God's book is mentioned 4 times throughout the Bible. I think it's mentioned 3 times in the Old Testament, 1 time in the New Testament. And 3 of the 4 times it's talked about names taking out. I think it's mentioned twice in Psalms and was it Exodus maybe or Genesis? Somewhere in the Torah, I believe. But 3 of the 4 times it talks about names coming out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So 75% of the time that God mentions his book, it's mentioning the possibility of names being erased. And in fact, in the Greek text, when you really break it down, it's it actually means scraped off. It's not just like blot, it's scraped off. Like your name is actually being judged.
Yeah.
As it's being taken off. In fact, if I had just read 3 lines down, I could tell you where it's actually mentioned. Exodus, Psalms twice, and Revelation. So I was pretty close from my memory.
Yeah.
I did say Exodus. I said Exodus or Genesis. Yeah. So we can forgive my uncertainty because it was right there and I didn't read it. So, 3 of the 4 times talks about names being taken out.
Yes.
This means it's a deadly serious matter. Revelation was written, or one of the reasons why it was written was to show us how to keep our names in that book, which is why the themes are endure and overcome.
Mm-hmm.
Funny how everyone sees Revelation as strictly prophecy, but yet when you break down the whole message of it, prophecy is just technically not even the majority of the book. Like, yes, the seals, the trumpets, the judgment, the 2 witnesses, the destruction of Mystery Babylon, Judgment Day, New Heaven, New Earth, eternity. Yeah, but there's so much going on that's not prophecy leading up to all this. And even, through all that the only thing people tend to pick up on is the prophecy part.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons why this book was written was to show us how to keep our names in the book of life.
Mm-hmm.
Revelation was written to Christians. It's important to remember this.
Yeah.
Unbelievers are not the audience. Believers are the audience. In fact, and a lot of people don't like when I say this, a lot of Christians don't like when I say this, but the Bible was not written for those who don't believe.
That's right.
Very few writings in the Bible had unbelievers in mind. The Torah, written to people who believe.
Mm-hmm.
Prophets, written to people who believe. You could say maybe Ecclesiastes because it has a lot of wisdom in it. Songs of Solomon could appeal to unbelievers because it's a love story.
Mm-hmm.
Psalms to a certain degree, maybe Proverbs. That's it in the Old Testament. The New Testament, there's only 3 that had unbelievers in mind. Mark, Luke, because it was written to one unbeliever, and Acts, because Acts is actually an outline for how to evangelize. So that's what, maybe 6 of the 66? So that means 60 of the writings, Christians or those who believe,
Mm-hmm.
are the audience. And Revelation is one of those 60.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's why unbelievers mock it and make fun of it. And they try and tear it down and say that it's just a fairy tale. It's not written for them. If they ever become believers, it's written for them.
Yes.
So, but anyway, Revelation was written to Christians. Keep that in mind. The chapter where we see the new heaven, then the new earth, is a breathtaking chapter to see. Right? But what do we see again? He who overcomes will inherit all this. But the cowardly and the faithless, the immoral, etc., they will end up in the lake of fire. There's a negative aspect there. Okay? Positive and negative. Yin and yang. God's kindness, God's justice. Jesus is talking about a cowardly, faithless believer too. Again, this is not easy to hear, but when you read in, Matthew's gospel, when Christ said, on that day, many will say to me, Lord, Lord, and I will say to them, depart from me. if you go back to the Greek, the word for many actually means the masses. And when you're talking about the masses, it always means the majority.
Mm-hmm.
So what Jesus is saying is the majority of people who call me Lord, not the majority of people who believed in Allah or who believed in Buddha or who didn't believe in anything at all. The majority of people who believed in him, called him Lord, are going to be told, depart from me, I never knew you.
Yeah. It's like the lukewarm Christians, right?
Well, lukewarm. Also, the declare only Christians, whose actions showed nothing of what the Christian faith looks like. It was words only. Christians who, well, here, ready? In this world, most people identify as a Christian. But if you go back to or if you listen to what they believe, it's nothing to do with the Bible. 2 or 3 years ago, I seen an article that said 77% of America identifies as Christian, but only 6% hold a biblical worldview. That means 71% of Americans have created their own Christianity in which they call Jesus Lord in, and it's not the Christianity he's Lord of. Yeah. So when they stand before him, they're going to be told, I never knew you. You weren't following me. You were following what you wanted the Christian faith to be, not what it actually was.
Yeah.
And Jesus is talking about those people as well. The cowardly believer, the faithless believer, and the it's this way believer. We all encounter them. Oh, but isn't Christianity this way? Isn't it that way? Yeah. Don't you think? I'm like, no, I don't think, because the Bible tells me what it is. I don't have to guess what the Christian faith is.
Yeah, that's right.
There's 32,000 scriptures that tell me what it is.
Mm-hmm.
What's there to think about? There's nothing to think about. It's right there. But anyway, Jesus said, he who overcomes will inherit all this. Now, when I wrote my book, The Awakening of Revelation, I actually went into trying to describe what the New Jerusalem is going to look like. And, there's no way that anyone could actually describe it, but we do have ways where we can get glimpses of like the beauty that it's probably going to be. And, it's going to be breathtaking. And that's going to be a reward that Jesus said we're going to inherit. Mm-hmm. Right? But if we deny Jesus, right? And Jesus did give a warning. Mm-hmm. If you deny me, I'll deny you. Yeah. My Father, right? Yeah. Also, Paul said this is a faithful saying, for if we die with him, we shall also live with him. Mm-hmm. If we endure, we shall also reign with him. If we deny him, he will deny us. If we are faithless, he remains faithful. He cannot deny himself. So Jesus will always remain faithful, but it's us who might not. Yeah. And so part of the reason why Revelation was written was to help believers keep their names in the book of life by enduring and overcoming and giving us incentives like, look what you're going to endure. Do the will of God. Don't just speak it. Do it. Show your faith by your works, like James says. And here's the thing. Unto death. You know that phrase? Unto death? Okay. Not until death, which a lot of people think that's what it means. Okay? That means you have a sword to your throat, about to get your head cut off. You stay faithful. Mm-hmm. Unto death. Which means if you're one of the unlucky Christians that's about to die for their faith in a brutal, barbaric way, your dying heartbeat still beats for the Lord.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Never wavers. Because you know what? When your soul returns to heaven, your head is still attached to it. So, and you're going to get a new body anyway. So say goodbye to the corrupt, diseased body that gets, watery eyes, cavities, earaches, facial hair that turns white. Although I still say it's the 60-watt light bulb. Not me. And Ashley said, so then I guess I should get the 100-watt light bulb, and then you can really see you look like you
Oh,
really look like an old man. You know, so you know what? The world can have it.
wisdom.
Yes, that's what I should tell her. You know what? The whiter it gets, the smarter I am.
There you go.
She is not going to accept that one. The absolute one thing that she has a hard time accepting is I from time to time tell her when we're all with the Lord, that means I'm going to be perfect one day. And she's just like, I just can't see it yet. Married life, right?
I know, right?
All right, so enough about me. Moving on. The structure of Revelation. So let's get into a little more of that now, okay? The book is divided into two parts that are clearly seen once they are said. And I'm going to say them right now. Present and future.
Mhm.
Things as they are now in the present, things that need to be made right before the major persecution comes. And this is primarily the reason why Jesus wrote his letters to the churches, which, by the way, in a couple of weeks, wait until we go over why he wrote those letters. I'm going to do a whole history and geography lesson going over it.
Nice.
It's going to be fascinating. But for those who are a little nerdy, it's going to be like a treasure chest. Not that I'm just doing it for you. I'm not nerdy. Not that nerdy. Maybe I was. So anyway, the primary reason why he wrote those letters to the specific churches was so not only that they could be able to endure and overcome successfully, but they had to have certain things put right so they could endure and overcome successfully.
Mhm.
There were problems in many of these churches
Yeah.
that needed to be addressed. Churches that are compromised in any way will not be able to endure. They will fall and fall apart.
Mhm.
The only way a church or people can make it through intense persecution is to be strong in the faith and united. But once those cracks begin, Satan's going to blow them right apart.
Oh, yeah. He'll sneak
Be
in.
united in the faith together, helping each other to live a holy, righteous life. This is how we and the church will stay strong. This is one of the reasons why the letters were written, because these churches were being corrupted by a number of things. Now, I'm going to sort of jump the gun a little bit here, but just sort of give you an example. It's kind of funny. In Ephesus is a couple of the wonders of the world, right? And I believe the Temple of Diana is in that area. It's in that city, or it's close to somewhere there. And I believe that this is the story behind it. It's not in my notes here, but I think this is it. At some point, either a giant rock from a mountain or a meteorite crashed down in the area, and it had a very unique shape.
Mhm.
It was shaped like a female breast. So it was given a temple and it was worshipped. And so basically what you had there was you have a bunch of, boobs worshiping a boob in the middle of a temple.
Yeah.
But you can see how things quickly go astray
Mhm.
over the smallest or over the most unlikely reasons.
Yeah.
A meteorite or a rock that has a weird shape is now being worshipped, and God is not.
Yeah.
But why does that happen? Because the church was not strong in the truth.
Mhm.
And so, but God was writing these letters to correct situations like that, because that's how we prepare for what's to come if we're going to survive it, overcome it. So basically, chapters 1 to 3 are things that need to be made right in those churches, which, by the way, there are a lot of churches today that resemble one of them with their issues
Mhm.
and their problems. I would say some of these problems probably even worse when you got drag queens preaching
Oh,
God's word, or you have lesbians preaching God's word, or you have openly homosexual pastors walking around saying that, don't have to believe this part of the Bible because it's not true anymore, but believe,
yeah. And the
you know,
United Church here in the town that I'm in has got the pride flag and
uh,
everything. It's I
I
had
can't,
I had one young guy in my youth group. It's one of the other young guys said something about being gay and homosexuality and pride, and that is against God. And one of the young guys said to me, he was just new to our group. He was just 12 years old. And he said, "Is that true?" I said, "Yes, it tells us in the Word of God, men shall not lie with men and things like that." And he said, "Well, why do the church have a pride flag up there?" I mean, the
good
kids,
question.
right? And I'm like, well, there's a lot of churches teaches false doctrine, and but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, kids is really, and some kids being led to think, well, it must be okay because the church feels
Well,
that.
and that's actually the thing. I've had even adults tell me that there's so many people living certain types of lifestyles now that God must be okay with it because He created them all. And I said, well, the last generation that started thinking like this drowned in a flood.
That's right.
It, drowned in a flood. God must be okay with it. God lets you know what He's okay with.
Yeah.
Sending a flood to flood the whole world is a pretty good indication He's not okay with it.
Yeah.
Allowing 2 cities to be burned to the ground from hail and lightning from heaven that was still burning when Jesus walked the earth, mind you, pretty good indication He's not okay with it. Actually, it was 4 cities. It wasn't 2. It was actually 4, but they were still on fire, I believe, when Jesus walked the earth.
Yeah.
I mean, how intense is that? I actually saw this video, I think 5-6 years ago. Archaeologists believe they really did discover Sodom and Gomorrah. And what it said was the intense heat that burned this area up in could never be duplicated upon Earth.
Wow.
And they're right. It can't be. But hey. But here's the thing. The churches that do this stuff are telling us what kingdom they're part of.
Well, yes, of
And
course.
it's not God's.
No.
And they're telling us to stay away from them.
Yeah.
So, chapter 4. Chapter 4 is where things change a little bit. John is, called up to heaven and is shown things that are, happening and will happen. John is shown the future.
Mm-hmm.
He is shown what's happening in heaven, and then he's going to be shown what's going to happen on earth. And we read so much about the future. The reader is taken to heaven, but we read about things that are happening on earth too. And finally, we read about a new heaven and a new earth. And by the way, John saw things that are very similar to what the Old Testament prophets saw when they saw the throne too. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, I think even Daniel, they all talk about the winged creatures, and they, all talk about some of the same details. So we know John saw the same thing. Ezekiel actually saw God's throne in a unique way because he saw it outside the temple. He saw it while he was in exile in Babylon.
Yeah.
And he was asking, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be in the temple. And then, of course, God showed him, my people threw me out. They didn't want me there anymore. So I left. John learned something very important. Everything happening in heaven is okay. God's in complete control.
Mm-hmm.
Before John is shown the horrors about to come upon the earth, he is shown how everything in heaven is actually going fine. God is not surprised or shaken by anything. He sits on his throne, and all of heaven is at peace. At least in that moment. But there's going to come a time where heaven is silenced because of what's happening down here.
Yeah.
But sometimes we can look around the world and we can feel maybe God's lost control. A lot of people tend to say at time to time, like, look at everything that's happening throughout this whole world.
Mm-hmm.
It's not even in control, but Revelation is telling us he is. And
yes.
he's the one that's, in the end, he's not controlling us like robots. But whatever he decrees comes to pass.
Mm-hmm.
And Revelation teaching us is also teaching us that God is in control. He always was, and he always will be.
Yeah, sure.
And so whenever bad things happen on earth, whenever war breaks out, when people are killed by the hundreds, whenever a new COVID variant pops up, you know, like
Yeah.
like the EG5 apparently, you know, God's in control. When hurricanes and other disasters strike, we must say out loud and say it often, God is still on his throne.
Mm-hmm.
No hurricane surprised him.
Yeah.
Heaven's not being affected by any of these things, and we shouldn't let them affect us either, because God's throne has not been shaken.
Mm-hmm.
God's throne's been under assault since Satan thought he could take it.
Yeah.
You know, and he's never even come close.
No,
He's never going to come close.
that still blows my mind.
Well, I guess when you're created like the number 2 to him, and
Yeah.
you are given your own will, your own heart, your own desires, and you're given all this power. I mean, what do they say? Power corrupts, and absolute power absolutely corrupts.
Mm.
And Satan was corrupted. He was corrupted by it. And he even said, like, you were perfect in all your ways until the day iniquity was found in you. And then from there, you were cast out because you were no longer good. And there was no redemption for him. You know, for us, there's redemption. No redemption for him. It even says in Hebrews, you know, Christ didn't come for the angels. You know, he didn't come for them. He came for us. So, you know, John seeing all of this helps to make him ready to deal with the persecution about to come, not only his way, but the church's way. After seeing all this, John begins to see the future of the world and what's going to happen down here. And it's not good. It's not good. It's not a good picture. Things will become worse before they become better. You know, that's usually the case. You know, like the old phrase, it's always darkest before the dawn. And the tribulation is going to be the darkest it could ever possibly be before the dawn of a new heaven, a new earth. Actually, the 1,000-year reign before new heaven and new earth. But once again, these are things of the future that we are told to help us prepare for. It gives us the keys to prepare for what's coming, which is the key to this book. God tells the future so that those living during this time will know what to expect. They can be ready beforehand, not just before and not during. Very hard to get ready for this kind of persecution during. Like, I don't actually often say this, but maybe we should often say this. Christians living in the Eastern world, we should really pay attention to what they have to, fear, or no, I don't want to say fear, but get ready for every day. You know, they go to church. They don't know if the door is going to be locked and the church set on fire.
Yeah.
They don't know if someone's going to come strolling in there with an automatic weapon and shoot them all. They don't know if some group of terrorists is going to kidnap them all and kill them in some barbaric way. Yeah, you know, that's their reality. They're ready for it. If that started happening here tomorrow, no one would or very few would actually be able to get through it.
Yeah.
Because they weren't prepared for it. And when you try to tell them about it, they laugh at you. That'll never happen here.
Yes. Yeah.
Not here.
Yeah.
Not in America. Not an enlightened America that God blesses like crazy. No, that will never happen here. Well, the Bible says the whole world.
I know they were lighting churches on fire and burning them here in Alberta.
Yeah. Because the tolerance for us is going away. There was a time when unbelievers in America and even in Canada, didn't want to kill believers. That time is coming to an end.
Yeah.
But for great will our rewards and eternity be with Jesus. That's the future we have to look forward to. not this corrupt, disgusting world.
Mm-hmm.
Ready? Think about this. This world is so bad. This universe is so bad. God's written it off. He's going to destroy it and create a new one.
Yeah.
That's how far gone this is. So we can't expect paradise now. We can expect blessings and we can expect good times, yeah, but what a lot of Christians want, this world will never be.
No.
And it's because they're not taught adequately the world to come.
Mm-hmm.
You know? But what caused all this, right? What caused this 180? What changed the projection of the book of Revelation was taking us on? Well, the answer to this question is in chapter 19. Do you know what chapter that is? That is the chapter Jesus returns.
Mm-hmm.
He comes back to take care of evil on the earth once and for all. So this is kind of a basic outline structure for Revelation, right? Revelation fits one of the views of history very, very well, too. So let's go over these views of history, right? Because they're fun. The Greek view of history is that history goes in a circle and repeats itself, right? And this is called a cyclic history. And by the way, there are a lot of things that do repeat. You know, history does repeat itself. But the epic view of history is this. This is the view that says history goes forward and does not repeat itself. History only goes up and down. Good times and bad times. You do not know where it will end, but it's always going to go forward. Mm-hmm. The optimistic view of the 20th century, for example, people felt would actually be the greatest century in human history. They had great reason to think that. If you look at the huge differences in the world between 1800 and 1900, it was astounding how far mankind had come in 100 years. People were excited to see what the next 100 years of progress would bring. And I mean, there was some progress. All different kinds of diseases exploded. Wars, you know. All different types of sin became acceptable. Lots of progress. The 20th century had some great advancements too in transportation and communication, and even in like amoxicillin and all those kinds of medicines that can help you get better from a lot of different types of bacteria infections. So I mean, there was some good stuff too in the 20th century. Apparently Al Gore invented the internet. I mean, I've been hearing that for 35 years, but but it was the bloodiest century in human history. From the turn of 1899, 1900 until 2000, hardly a day went by in that 100-year period where there wasn't a war or major conflict somewhere on this earth. Some of the worst storms and earthquakes in human history hit in the 20th century. Some of the most I can't even think of the word to describe, but some of the most brutal mass killings of history happened in the 20th century. Not just the Soviet Union, not just the communist takeover of China, not just Pol Pot, not just Hitler. Like, there were a lot of terrible, terrible people that murdered millions in the 20th century. So, there was when the clock struck midnight and it was 1900, people couldn't wait to see what would happen. And then about 20 years later, people were starting to realize maybe this century is not going to be the cream of the crop like we thought it was. So, but then there's also the pessimistic view of history. We all know people that have this view. Things are going to get worse and worse. And that view was actually born because of the letdown the 20th century was. The Bible view of history is actually this. After things have gotten bad and worse, they will get better. And everything will turn around. So it's really like the 180 view of history. During the bad, you will see cycles of things that happened. that were bad, or like very similar things that have happened. But it's going to get better. It always does. Okay? That is how our library, the Bible, views history. When it starts getting bad, it's going to get worse, but it's going to get better. One of the things that gets missed in the prophets, for example, the prophets of God basically gave whoever they were, speaking to, bad news. Like, judgment is coming, destruction is coming, and that's most of their message. In fact, a lot of the minor prophets, or what we call the minor prophets, it gets kind of boring to read them because it's the same message to the same people. Some of those prophets spoke at the same time, or very similar to the same time frame. So it's like it's reading the same book with just a different name attached to it.
Yeah.
But there's one part that's missed in all the prophets, and that is it gets better. God restores. He brings his remnant back. He creates again what had to be judged. So that's the Bible view. Just like the flood, right? The world was bad. God's going to wipe out the flood, but mankind's going to go on, right? The water's going to recede. You'll be on dry land again.
Yeah. We have one lady by the name of Liz as asking, what is Pol Pot?
Pol Pot?
Yeah.
I think he killed 2 million people in Cambodia. I think he was the guy that did that. He was a leader. He was a terrible leader. I believe he killed 2 million people in Cambodia when, in the 60s or in the 50s, maybe. I don't know. It was before my time, so I'm not sure the dates. I'm not sure the decade, but it was the 20th century. An evil man, who killed millions of people, all for power.
Yeah.
And it goes to show you, he didn't kill 2 million people himself. He had people do it.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes to show you the power of Satan's kingdom. That Satan can get one person to be so, worshipped that they will literally do terrible things to others just because they are told to.
Yeah.
I know most of us know the horrors of the Holocaust, of what the Nazis did to their prisoners, right? But we know the watered down version of it.
Yes.
If you ever were to actually read the details of what they would do, you'd probably stop about 4 lines in, and you would not physically be able to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to some of us, the idea of doing this to another human being is just, even if something bad creeps into our heads, to go, I want to do this to that person, we immediately stop because we're like, I would never do that. Like, that wasn't me talking. That was definitely a demon that just got me at the right moment, right? But there are people in this world that do that. Listen, regardless of what people think about 9/11 now, missiles or planes, let's just say it's planes with terrorists. There are people in this world that would actually do that. And let's say they actually did. There are people in this world that strap bombs to themselves and walk into these places and blow themselves up to kill people.
Yeah.
That's not made up.
Yeah.
That type of evil exists. And it's always existed, but there have been some awful, awful, awful people throughout the history of this world. But of course, the event that sparks the 180 turn for us that we need to look forward to, that we endure and overcome to see, is Jesus returning on the white horse, taking care of evil that has engulfed the earth. I hear a lot of people say to me, right? A lot of people say to me, if your God is real, why doesn't he take care of evil? And I go, well, that's a good question. Do you want him to start with you? And they just look at me and go, what do you mean? I said, well, do you want him to start with you? Well, why would he start with me? Well, you're evil. Why am I evil? Because you haven't been born again. You're not being redeemed. Therefore, you're sin, and sin is evil. And if you want God to take care of all evil, he has to take care of you too. So do you want him to take care of you? And of course, the answer is always no. I said, okay, maybe you should be a little more grateful that he has a lot of patience, because one day he's going to take care of evil. You see, in the Old Testament, justice came a lot quicker.
Mm-hmm.
In the New Testament, it's going to be a day, a justice day, a judgment day.
Yeah.
So be grateful for the patience that he has with you. Because if he didn't, none of us would be alive. So, but one day Jesus is coming back
Mm-hmm.
to take care of that evil.
That's right.
And on that day, we are not going to be part of it. We who believe, we who endured, we who overcame.
That's right.
And I think that's a good place to stop.
Perfect.
So we kept this one to an hour.
An hour and 55 seconds.
Now it's 55 seconds. So yeah. So next week, hopefully, same time,
Yes.
9:30 on Thursday.
So it'll be a Thursday?
Yeah, like I think Thursdays is really the best day for me.
Okay.
Sometimes I could do like a Tuesday, but I think you said Tuesday wasn't good for you.
No, we have our prayer night at the church.
Okay, all right. So,
Friday nights I have youth group, but we're off for the summer now until.
all right. Well, we could also do like a Friday maybe, but I think next week let's plan for Thursday, and we will continue on. Just think of the like 500-page outline that this Revelation study is going to be. We're only 36 pages in, everyone. We got a long way to go. And you know what the funniest thing is too? I think I said this last time, but what, like 3-4 years ago is when I wrote my book, The Awakening of Revelation. And as I was actually doing this outline, I was going through it going, wow, I didn't say anything from my book in here really.
Oh, wow.
So I could write like 10 more volumes. The Awakening Part 2, Part 3, Part 4. Or I could just do the outline, just go, here it is.
Tell us again, Joe, where we can get your books.
Well, you can get that one once again on lulu.com. I redid the cover and I reset it all up. I got to redo the cover to Our Father Exists, which is another book that I wrote that actually tackles proving God exists in a different way than anyone ever has before. And I actually let an atheist family member read it, and he was like, I can't dispute this. I said, I know you can't. That's why I gave it to you.
Yeah.
The real question is, are you going to start believing it now?
Yeah.
And he didn't tell me no. He said, well, you have given me a lot to think about. I said, good, read it again and think more about it. Read it 1,000 times. It takes 40 minutes to read it from start to finish. Read it once a day.
Yeah.
So anyway, this was a lot of fun again.
Yes.
It will not be 2 months before we get back here. We shall be back here next week. And everyone have a great night, and you do too. And if you have anything else to add, hey, add it.
That's right. All right.
Any questions about anything that we talked about?
Not for me. Now, underneath the live chat, you might want to go back and check it because there may be some questions there for you. Not sure. Every now and then I glances over at it, but
oh, yeah. Well, I actually can't. Well, I guess I can see it. I can because I had my phone, my outline on it in front of it.
Yeah.
So I can see it now, but I can only see like 4 of them. Well, let me do a quick check. Never heard of them. Oh boy, probably did. I don't envy them. Blah blah. Yeah. Hey Joe, tuning in late. Hope I can stay the whole thing. I don't see too many, but you know what? Anyone can send me an email too. I will happily answer any question as long as my 3 little munchkins are not climbing all over me.
And your email address is?
Well, they can send it right to my Facebook Messenger. Really is really. But if they want to, they can send it to christianjoedixon@gmail.com.
Okay.
Very simple, just those 3 words: christianjoedixon@gmail.com. But they can send it right to my Facebook too. So
Okay.
Anyway, have a good night. I'll see you next week.
You have a good night, and we will see you again next Thursday, hopefully, if all goes well.
Yep. As long as nothing happens with the kids,
Yep.
I should be able to hop on and continue on.
Okay.
See you
All right.
later.
Have a
Bye
good
bye.
night. God bless.
You too. God bless.